All right, so we're looking at ecology right now. As we can see, we see some wolves and an elk in this particular environment. We're going to be looking at how wolves and different organisms interact with one another as we move forward. How do they influence one another's behavior, decision making, so on and so forth. And that's the primary focus of ecology. What I have asked you to do is read the next two pages, pages 3 and 4, which you can follow along with me on the screen here. I'll be doing some highlighting as well. You may want to translate my highlighting onto your own papers as we kind of work through the next few minutes here. So as I just mentioned, we're looking at the wolves in Yellowstone, which is exactly what our title is here. It's going to give us a little bit of a history on the wolves in Yellowstone, a little bit of information about them. As we read through this, we have to look for information in here that's going to help us answer the guiding question, which, once again, the guiding question is, how do living things interact with living and non-living parts of the environment? So, as we go through, please highlight along with me. So here we go. Imagine you could travel back in time 1,000 years. What differences would you notice in the animals and plants in the area where you live? What kind of animals might you see? Bears, wolves, and eagles used to live where New York City now stands. You have to understand that before New York City was a city, it was just bare land. There was trees, probably a forest there, maybe some mountains. Continuing. Today, coyotes, deer, and peregrine falcons can sometimes be found in the city. In many places in the world, the populations of plants and animals have changed as human populations have grown. In some places, the changes haven't been as extreme. In Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, there used to be wolves, black bears, and grizzly bears, but now there are only black bears. Why do you think these changes occurred? What effects do you think these changes have had on the other animals and the plants that live in the area? What do you think would happen if some animals like bears were brought back to live in these environments? So reflecting on what we read, I can see that there's discussion about organisms, but I'm not seeing any direct explanation as to how living things interact with the environment. I did notice that there's mention of some animals living in the city. How might these things actually survive in a city? Well, I have seen coyotes in my own neighborhood. How are they able to live there? It's kind of a city. It's not desert anymore, although it used to be desert, which is the native environment of a coyote. Falcons, birds of prey. These are birds that will eat small animals. They can be found in cities. So we have to start thinking about, as humans influence the places where these organisms lived naturally, how do they have to adapt to continue to survive? Considering if they don't adapt, they'll die off. Continuing on. In this chapter, we'll focus on the relationships between living things and non-living things in the environment. You'll investigate the effects of disruptions, which are events that change environments. Ooh, that sounds like it might influence the way animals interact with their environment. If things change in the environment, then the animals have to change their living patterns. And it also says, continuing on, that these changes are caused by humans and their actions. As we study scientific questions, you'll engage in scientific practices, the things that scientists do to explain the world. We'll be doing a lot of these scientific practices this semester. For example, scientists analyze the data they collect to develop explanations for how things work. Scientists also construct arguments about which explanation makes the most sense. You will develop scientific explanations about relationships and changes in the environment. You will learn how to use your explanations to construct scientific arguments about the ways humans affect the environment and whether people should try to reduce disruptions. Page 4. We're looking at people and animals and their interactions. More than 305 million people visited the national parks in 2015. One of those parks was Yellowstone National Park, which we see in this image right here. We can see it is kind of on the border of Wyoming, extending a little bit into Montana and slightly into Idaho. So it's almost directly north of where we live here in Phoenix. The park was created in 1872 by the federal government to preserve or save a large wilderness area. Yellowstone is home to many types of plants and animals and a majority of the world's geysers, which we see down below. Right here we're looking at a geyser, which is a hot spring, which shoots water up into the air based on hot lava, essentially, that is kind of near the surface underground. The animals in Yellowstone include bison, grizzly bears, moose, and wolves. So we have some animals. These guys live in Yellowstone. Looks like we might look at how they interact. These animals interact, which is part of our guiding question. How do they interact? So they interact with plants and other animals and non-living things, including air. Oh, there's a non-living thing that they interact with air. How might they interact with air? Water. How might they interact with water? And then soil or dirt. How can animals interact with these three things? They're not alive. Scientists study the interactions between living and non-living parts of the environment. Over time, they can use this information to tell how disruptions, once again, disruptions are events that change environments, and affect these interactions. In this unit, you'll investigate how and why environments get disrupted.